Hi everyone, I thought I should do this video to address the forum discussion for week 6 around the HR case study for the HR information that I shared with you, and I gave you a model answer, and you then took that further in the forum discussion. So that exercise is a simulation of question assessment 3, question 1C, where you have the question reads, you have been requested information that is more HR specific, and your colleague emailed you the following information, which is then the case study below. And the question says, read the following case study and answer the 3 questions that follow. Okay, I think as mentioned in another voice thread video, there are actually 2 questions, which is 1 and 2 there. The third one is just to prompt you to make any assumptions. So that is the case study for the assessment. Now the practice case study is sort of similar to that. The numbers are different, and you've obviously looked at this in terms of doing the activity and the forum discussion. So I just want to share my thoughts around this practice case study. And these are only my thoughts. I mean, you could interpret the case study in different ways, but this is sort of my, as I mentioned, my take on it. So, explain and interpret the HRM related statistics is the first question for this case study, which is a simulation of the assessment case study. And I note here that learners should evaluate the staff turnover ratio. And sort of my thoughts around this was that based on the employee satisfaction rating, which is not good, and the staff engagement indicators, the staff turnover ratio, I think that is actually low given the high satisfaction rate. You may differ from that, but that is just my sort of thinking based on my experience with poor performing companies and where people leave in droves. So maybe so what I mentioned here in my suggested answer is that the staff, they are staying although they're unhappy, and therefore you also have that low engagement score, because they can't really find other jobs. And particularly what often happens in organizations that don't perform well and don't treat their people well, is that your best people leave and they can get other very good jobs for themselves, and some people may be risk averse and they don't want to leave a job, but you'll find that your people that are more mobile would probably leave. So maybe they've already gone, and I'm just kind of thinking aloud as I do this video, but that's a thought that I attach to that statistic rather. And again, you may feel different and then just motivate it accordingly. And then also comment on the employee satisfaction and relate that to engagement. I think you've mostly done that in the forum discussion. So the overall employee satisfaction is 61.4, whereas the industry average is 79. Most of you pointed that out. It's exceptionally low, and when looked at in relation to the engagement statistics, indicates a severe problem for the company. So from an HR point of view, HR as a strategic partner, this is a severe problem. And then what you should also specifically identify is that whereas the 61.4% is the overall employee satisfaction, staff satisfaction within the factory labor force is lower than that 61.4%, at 57.9%. And then this is a real figure, Human Sciences Research Council benchmark, Black African is 69% satisfaction, and the majority of people in the factory labor force are African, and there's 57.9% ratio satisfaction is even lower than the HRSC benchmark at 69% for black laborers, and so that's a real issue. So I tie that into also the issue around how black workers are treated, which is somewhere in a case study as well. And then you could also point out in your assessment the increase in productive days lost to labor disputes, and find a possible cause in your interpretation. So the interpretation could read something like tensions between management and staff in the factories, maybe it should just be factory, I think, have been building up steadily over the last number of years, as evidenced among others by the increase in productive days lost, 3.2 days in 2014, 12.6 days in 2019, due to these labor disputes. And then you could also link absenteeism to engagement and or satisfaction. Absenteeism at 6.8%, whereas the benchmark is 1.9%, is a further indicator of lack of engagement of staff. And then you should also then link various other, the above in some other ways as well. So learners should be able to link employee engagement, staff satisfaction, and absenteeism ratios kind of as a triad, so to speak. So you've already pointed out, in this case, 9.9% of staff are actively engaged, 46.1% of staff are disengaged, and 44% of staff are actively disengaged. And then, of course, these engagement statistics are of further greater concern and correlates with the low staff satisfaction and high absenteeism. So when I developed these case studies, I tried to keep them relatively aligned with reality and my understanding of actual staff engagement across industry. And you can do a little bit of Google research if you want to. That's where I found my information. And you will find credible resources there, for example, companies that conduct these sort of studies. Is that overall staff engagement across the world, it may differ from country to country, but it could be much higher. So organizations have got quite a large task strategic task, because of the importance of people to do things that increase the percentage of actively engaged staff. So just something around this. So 46.1% of staff are disengaged. So they probably do their work based on their job descriptions, but they're not like quite excited to come to work all the time. And I'm just kind of making a generic comment around this. You could describe that in other ways as well. What is specifically of concern is if you look at 44% of staff are actively disengaged. So what actively disengaged mean is that people talk amongst one another, whereas the disengaged staff, 46%, may just carry on and they won't kind of badmouth the company kind of that actively. The 44% that are actively disengaged will do so, and they will be a poison in the system. And let's not say we want to get rid of them, but how can we overcome that and make them engaged? The point being is that is very dangerous. People are bad-mouthing the company, and probably not only in the business where they affect other people, but they may do so at home, around a braai and whatever, so they would actively, sort of bad talk, if I can put it that way. In severe cases, actively disengaged staff may in fact also in some ways sabotage the operation of the company. For example, I think the Eskom scenario, which we're all so familiar with, apparently there is sabotage. Now, there could be other reasons for that as well, for example, some political undercurrents and so on, but you could imagine the staff engagement statistics at the company like that. Okay, so and then of course these engagement statistics further concern and correlates with the low satisfaction and high absenteeism. And I actually have already spoken to learners should be able to evaluate the impact from a high percentage of actively disengaged staff, so you can read what I've written there. Actually badmouth and they're reducing morale, motivation and productivity, and what I didn't put in here was the issue of possible even sabotage could happen. And sabotage could be not as explicit as kind of throwing a spanner in the works, literally in the factory production line. It could be to sort of do all sorts of things that falls in a big banner of inverted commas sabotage. And then you also can make an overall point that that the high investment in human resources, for example, as illustrated by I think it's something like 78% of the total expenses relate to human cost and total employee cost to company. So that doesn't mean necessarily that people are paid a lot. It just means that the company, its total expenses is sort of dominated by employees because of, in this specific company, because it's a factory environment and so on, people is such a big strategic issue, which is what that number should indicate to you, which, I mean, we've already mentioned it, but it further evidence of what a strategic issue is around the staff and how you interpret the various statistics, and at this point will mean that it will go up to board level in terms of how do we fix this. And then of course the other important factor that is highlighted by the statistics, which kind of more or less I think is still in some cases a concern in real business in South Africa, where there's an inequity of racial representation, I suppose particularly at the senior level and at supervisor level often and so on. I think it is changing, but this particular case study might be realistic for some companies that are not quite as proactive in this regard. So it's something that you obviously, I've seen it in a forum discussion, you've picked that up, some of you have identified that as your key statistic there. Okay, so yeah, and then learners should then be able to identify the unhappiness of factory workers relating to them feeling disrespected and ignored and the racism they experienced. I think the case study mentions something about, let me just go there, there was a so second staff experienced subtle racism, and they gave several examples examples to the focus group interviewers, which interviewed the staff to determine issues, okay? And then 45.7% of staff complaints have racial undertones and remains high despite disciplinary action where the outcomes were in favor of the complainants. So in other words, the complainants being the people that believe they've been acted in a racial disadvantaged way. So even with that, it still remains quite high. And then, of course, that would contribute to the tension between management and staff. So let's get back to the call it the suggested solution. So the point is just being made here that you should identify that as a strategic concern. Again, for example, in the factory, the managerial positions, supervisors, line managers, and senior line managers are filled 76.2% by Europeans. And remember, this statistic is specifically in the factory. It's not an overall number for the full company, okay, the head office, let's say the admin workers and so on. Okay, so I think I've gone off the point, but anyway, learners should be able to identify the unhappiness, rating them, feeling disrespected and ignored, and I went to the case study to look at that. So, you could make the connection or the come to the conclusion that the situation, among others, point to a serious disconnect between factory workers and management, leaving the workers feeling frustrated and disrespected because they don't have the power. Their power would be in the absenteeism, the absenteeism ratio, and and that sort of problem. Okay. I can't remember if I just want to go back to the case study again. This is the productive days lost due to strike action would be a way for the staff in the factory environment to express their dissatisfaction. And one would assume, the labor laws in South Africa allow for strike action in certain circumstances if you follow the Labour Relations Act, and one would assume these would be legal strikes, which means that the unions had a valid kind of case, so to speak, to embark on strike action. And so that would be the part of the reaction to see some form of power, where workers generally would not have the power if they work collectively around strikes and so on. They exert more power in the system. Okay, and then based on all that analysis that you've done, and which you will do in your question as well, is outline 5 implementable HRM-related initiatives. So these are, again, just my thoughts, okay? So I'm not saying you should have these as your 5 actions. I've got 6 here. But I'm just trying to give you a sort of a feel for what an initiative could look like. So in my experience in business, is almost most importantly, which would be the baseline to start rescuing, call it, this whole situation, is, if we take the racial issue as an example, that it continues to be an issue, although some action is taken, but maybe not enough is being done. So most importantly, by what we do, we must demonstrate to staff that we have taken note of their feedback and their dissatisfaction and so on. Because if we don't do that, we will exacerbate the problem and increase cynicism of staff towards management. So just in terms of, again, my experience around this is you would identify the issues and you would communicate with staff. But let's say you have a list of issues of 10, and I'm just picking a number, 10. What you then communicate to staff is that you will focus on these 3 top issues. The others you will not ignore, but you will specifically focus, let's say in the next year, on these 3. And then what you do is you actually do something about that and keep the staff updated as to progress. Because if you just say to them, we're going to do something, and you don't demonstrate that you're doing it, you will lead to cynicism, and staff won't trust management. Okay, so you need to deliver. And then in a short term, supervisory mid-level management must be engaged to convey a clear message of no tolerance for racial division, and then the company must act around that, which would tie in with Initiative 1. The company must revamp the company's diversity training program, because maybe that needs to be more done in a better, more effective way. Because the point is, you do need diversity training in a company. I mean, you've got racial issues in many countries, America, wherever, but South Africa specifically, because of our background, you need to be specific around that, and representation, all that. It needs to be front of mind. And then also what the company must be aware of if they, when they embark on this, not if, when they embark on this, is they must be aware of this level of management, though the current management core, which is disproportionately still European, and their possible feelings of being under threat because of the EE targets. That is, those managers might want to protect their turf. So I don't know how they're going to manage that, but I think the initiative must consider that and be specific about that. There could be various ways to manage that. And among others, what could happen is to manage that problem of representation is to identify high potential staff at factory floor level and develop a program to fast track them into supervisory level positions. And you don't just put them in those positions, you must, because you could do that and set them up for failure, you must give them proper training, mentoring from existing staff that have been around for a while, and so on. So it must be an initiative that is properly designed. And then also have a plan in waiting for developing the pipeline for higher levels of management, which is the next step up from supervisory level. So the idea is that you start with supervisory, this is a long-term thing, and then mold people in terms of diversity, that they can also then next step up to supervisory level. Again, the point being, you can't just put people in higher positions because of a diversity element, that people must be trained, or hire people that are trained when vacancies occur. So it needs to be explicit, need explicit plans. And then there's an assumption here that I've made here. There might be, it's an assumption, a few supervisory mid-level managers due to retire in the next year. And then an initiative could be to consider getting them to buy into a plan where they become mentors to high potential factory floor level staff to grow them into supervisory managerial material. And that would be an initiative that relates to number 3 there that I mentioned earlier. And then other elements of initiatives that have been successfully implemented in many organizations is to create dialogue forums at factory floor level to garner ideas from lower level staff and implement good ideas and reward proposals of these ideas, ideally on a team basis. So this now isn't necessarily on like the racial representation and so on, although this may come into it, but you create dialogue forums at factory floor level to engage people, to give you advice on what they experience when they work, what could be done better, and then through that and getting those ideas from them, you could increase the efficiency of methods and so on, effectiveness, and then also reward that on a team basis, ideally, for good ideas. So this is actually practical. What are we doing at factory floor level, and if people are given these dialogue forums, an action is taken based on the feedback in these, people start feeling that they have control, they've got some input in their environment. So that's just some idea around that. And then very importantly for this organization, unionization in South Africa can be very adversarial, but despite that, the business, as I mentioned here, for all the above, start off with engagement with the union. So for all of these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, you must involve the union leadership for them to know what you're doing, because you need to bring them in as partners, respect their role as representatives of the staff at floor level, and accept that there will be differences, but you need to take the lead as the company to involve them in explaining all of this and getting their buy-in to that. So what I'm saying is, for all the above, start off with engagement with the unions, to share the intention of these various initiatives of management to preserve jobs and increase the well-being of staff, and ongoing involvement of the union so that communication remains effective to secure buy-in. And what I haven't said here, which I'm only thinking about now, which is like underline, but I think maybe it should be explicit also to the union that they may have issue around the level of profit the company earns and so on, but they must also understand that for the company to survive and for employment to be given to many people, the company needs to be profitable. So these have got a people element, but also a more effective company and increasing profitability aim, which must be properly communicated to the unions, again, to get their buy-in around this. Okay, so I thought I should do this in response to the forum discussion. So hopefully this is helpful, bearing in mind also that you are going to do a similar exercise for the third assignment.